Hi guys, it's T with Teaquilts, and today I'm here to start video number 4 on the African Shuffle Take 5 kits. We are actually going to be working on borders. Stay tuned. So here is a portion of my quilt top. I've got it folded in 4s. You can just see where I've got one of my 4 patches showing here, so it's actually upside down. So when I looked at my quilt and trying to decide how much border I want and where did I want that border to go, I had to determine also what fabrics I wanted to use for my border. So I have been cutting a lot of kits, and so I decided I did want to use a string border. However, the size of my quilt top is 72.5 inches square edge to edge, and I need a quilt that's 96.5 inches edge to edge. I did not want to put a 24-inch or 12-inch border on each side of just strings. I thought that would be too much, and then it would also clash with the edge here. So as I was looking at my quilt, I saw lots of purple popping out for me. I know that there are spots where there are not purples. Case in point, these fabrics right here don't have any purple in them at all. But when I look at the quilt overall, I see a lot of purple. So I have decided that I'm going to use 2 shades of purple to put a pieced first border. So I'm actually going to do 3 strips, dark, a lighter purple, and then another dark one over here. And I'm going to then put my string border onto that. So you all know when it's time to do math, I have to get my piece of paper and we start working with the numbers. So we'll do that coming right up. Okay guys, so I have an asterisk here by the current size of my quilt top, which is 72.5 inches. I want my quilt to end up 96.5 inches edge to edge, and when I subtract that number, I come up with 24 inches. Now we do have 2 sides, each side of the quilt, and the top and bottom. So if I divide that by 2, that means that I need 12-inch finished of all borders in order to bring this quilt up to size. Now I could have put 12-inch strings, as I said in the intro or the clip previously to this, but I don't want 12-inch borders because it's going to clash with all of the piecing that's inside. So I need something to space my borders. So what I'm going to do, because I'm going to have to cut my strings anyway, and I know what size my strings are because I know what size fabrics I cut, I know that I can cut 2 6.5-inch pieces from my strings. So I already know that they're 13 to 14 inches in length. So I know that I can get 2 of these from the strings that I piece if I cut it directly in half. So that means this is going to be cut 6.5 inches, but it's going to finish at 6. So that means I still got another 6 over here that I need to account for in a border before I add my strings on. So what I have decided I'm going to do for my borders is I'm going to have a darker purple, and then I'm going to make a slightly bigger row of the lighter purple, and then I'm going to go right back into that dark purple, sorry. And then my strings are going to sit here. Okay, then these will be my strings. Okay, so if this is 6 inches, I want my center to be half of 6 in this border. So this is going to be a 6-inch border, and then this entire unit here is going to be 6 inches. So what I'm going to do is just take half of my 6 inches. This is going to be 3-inch finished. And then if this is 3-inch finished, I've got these two here that need to be half of 3 inches in order to be a total of 6. So they're going to be 1.5-inch finished. Okay, so what I'm going to be cutting from my dark purple is 2-inch strips because I'm adding back in my 1/2-inch seam allowance. And I'm also going to be cutting from my light purple 3.5-inch strips. Okay, and also because I'm using dark purple twice, I'm going to need twice as many dark purple as I do the lights. And so if my quilt is 72 inches, if I was to cut just 2 strips, the width of fabric for each side, then that means that I will have enough to go around the entire quilt. So I just figure I'm going to need 8 strips for this side of the border and 8 for over here. So if you have 4 sides to a quilt and you need 2 strips, that's 8 strips. So if I'm doing it twice, that means I need 16 strips. For the dark purple, I need 16. And then over here, the light purple, I need 8 strips. So by the magic of editing and pre-preparing, I've already cut those strips, have some of those here. So I have my 8 strips here of my light purple that is going into the middle of the quilt top. And then I think I have 16 strips here of my dark purples, which are going to go on either side of this strip. So this is what we're going to be looking at. And then when this is sewn together, it will end up being 6.5 inches. So this is our first step for the border, is that I need to go and sew these pieces into one long strip, and then I'm going to cut the actual sizes that I need, which is going to be 72.5 inches off for each one of these pieces for each side of the quilt. And then I'll decide, once I get those cut, what I want to do in my corners. You know, a quilt top meets up in a corner and you have your borders, and then I'll have to figure out what I want to do in this area right here once I get these units pieced. So my first goal is to get 4 pieces sewn together that are cut to 72.5 inches for my size of quilt. Okay, so I'm going to go do that and I'll be back. So I'm back and I have my strip sets all sewn together, and I rough cut them about 74 inches or so. And now what I have done is I have pressed this strip in half, got my center press so I know where the center goes on my quilt. It's down at my 0 mark on my machine. And now I'm just going to trim off at 36 1/4 on this end. All right, so now my strip set is now the size of my quilt top, and I have already done this to all of my other strip sets. So now I want to show you that I have already sewn the sides onto my quilt top. So both sides of my quilt top, I have already sewn this unit here onto the sides of my quilt top. So now I need to add it across my top and bottom. So I'm just going to open this up a little so we can just get one corner. And when we add our next strip set on the side, it will look like so. So we need it to fill in this space with something. So what I have done is just taken a 3.5 inch square that I cut, put it in the middle, put two pieces that were 2 by 3.5 on each side, and then two pieces that were 2 by 6.5 on top and bottom. And then when this is all sewn together, this is what that is going to look like. So this would be the setting for my quilt top. So let me show you the pieces for this block just so we can go over that again, make sure everybody is clear. You need a 3.5 inch square. To that square, you're going to add a 2 by 3.5 inch piece to each side. And then once that is sewn, you'll have a unit that looks like this. And then that unit, you're going to add a 2 by 6.5 inch piece on top and bottom. And those are my cornerstones. So I'm going to sew one end of this cornerstone to each end of my top and bottom border. So let me show you that. So I have my 2 border units that needed the cornerstones. This is one strip. I'm just showing you both ends. This is the entire strip. Got my cornerstone sewed on. And here is my second strip set, where the cornerstones are on the quilt. So now all I need to do now is just match up my centers where I pressed in my fold here to my centers, match up my cornerstones. Those seams should line up with the borders that I put on the side of the quilt, and I'm ready to sew these on. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I will do that and come back to you. So I went outside to take pictures of this quilt so I can let you see it all in its glory. And it is very windy outside and very cold. And I could not do any video because every time I walked back to the camera, the quilt would blow up. So I was able to get a few shots. I will add them here on the screen. But basically just wanting you to see how this quilt top is progressing thus far. So we're now going to go in and we're going to work on the string border, our final border for this quilt top. So we are back at our cutting area. And we are now ready to start working on strings. Now, with any other quilt top, when I'm making strings, I would never use a piece of fabric that's this large. But because these are such graphic geometrical prints, I am just leaving these prints into whatever size they fall into. I got some smaller chunks here. This is a super sized one. I normally would cut this into like 3 different pieces, and other ones are like more medium size prints. Also notice that on some of these prints, the fabric information is pretty high up off the selvage, as in this blue one here. And I am actually leaving all of that in. If we can make selvage quilts, why can't I leave the selvage in quilts? Especially when I like text in my quilts, and also it lets people know that this was made with particular fabric designs that are on your more higher caliber African print designs. So I am leaving this stuff into my quilt. So what I'm basically doing is when I have a really large piece, I'm opting to put in next to it something that's a little bit smaller here. So I'm just basically taking one stack, sewing other pieces to it, just chain piecing in pairs, and then when I get pairs, I will then sew the pairs into 4s, and then I do that until the piece gets big enough that I want to handle. You all know that I've done many quilting tutorials on how to make string blocks. These are just straight strings. They're not even crumbs. So basically you're just sewing one end to the next, not even caring about your 1/4 inch seam, not even caring if the strip is straight. You're just making pieces and sewing them, taking pieces and sewing them together. Okay, so we're going to skip that part. I'm going to sew these later. So here is some of the chunks that I have sewn together. So I'm just going to move my stack so we can see one at a time. So this one here only has 5 pieces on it. So there is no magic number as to when I stop and start my trimming process. It's just 5 pieces. This one here has a lot more. It has 6 pieces, and a lot of the pieces are pretty big, and you can see that they're not the same in length. I'm not worried about that at this particular time. I'm just sewing units together. And then I have this unit here, which is even longer than all 3 units. And you can see here where I have sewn in this fabric, and I have the salvage words popping up here and there, and it's in some other pieces as well. This one here has high target pretty up high, so when I sew my 1/4 inch seam down here, that whole high target's going to show, which is something that I love and like. So I'm excited about that. So now that I'm at this point, I don't wait until I get a strip set long enough to cover my whole quilt. And then you've got this long piece of strip piecing. It's going to be gigantic, and you're trying to fold it in half and figure out where half is, and then cut 2 pieces that are 6.5 inches. What I do is I cut my 6.5 inches on smaller chunks. Okay, so I do that. We all know how to line up on our grid. Here we square up one end, cut 6.5, and then cut another 6.5. These strips are approximately 13 to 14 inches, so there will not be any excess left over. I'm using everything, so I have no scraps left from this process that I'm currently doing. Everything is being used. So next step is, after I cut these into 6.5 inch pieces, which I have some here already. We've got them in different sizes, as you can see. My next step is I need to now square these up. In all honesty, I actually die cut these because I have a 6.5 inch die cut ruler, so that's what I did. And what I'm just going to do now is put the edge of one of the lines on my ruler along the edge of my fabric strip, get it close to the corner as I can, being square here on the piece, and I'm just going to square up my units here. So I'm going to turn this end around. I'm going to square both short ends because my strip is already 6.5 inches wide. And this is my new waist. Hardly anything. So I'm going to do that to all of the strips, and then I am going to start sewing these together. Now that I've got them all straight edged, I will start sewing these units together. And again, I'm trying to keep as much of my salvage as I can. So I'm just squaring up like I normally would. I'm not cutting off the salvage. So I'm okay with that. I think it's going to make for an interesting border on my quilt. Like I said, I'm making more of a utilitarian quilt, not something that's going to win any awards. Something that I want and something that I am going to enjoy looking at. And again, just squaring up to make sure that both top and bottom of my strip set is square. Keeping as much of the salvage as I can. Alright, so I am going to do this to all of my strips, and then I'm going to start sewing some of these into sets like this, which I have not done yet. And so I'll make these sets long enough to cover my border pieces. Right now I have about 20 of them, I think. And so I got 10 of each stack, because remember, when I'm cutting in half, I'm getting 2 of each stack. And a nice thing about not making a whole strip set when you're going to cut them in half is I can now mix these up so that in the other side, these 2 pieces wouldn't necessarily be touching. So it doesn't look like I actually had 2 of each set. They're going to be mixed up a little bit. So that's where we're at with this process. I'm going to continue to do that. Once I get pieces long enough to go on my quilt top, I'll come back and show you what I have. So I'm back, and I have just rewritten my numbers on a different piece of paper. We'll just quickly go through these again. Since I'm working on this string border, I'm going to explain what's happening here. I have 96.5 is the size that I want my finished quilt. My center without any borders was 72.5. So I needed 24 inches, 12 inches on each side and top and bottom of each quilt in order to reach this 96.5. So I just showed you in a couple of clips previously where I had this out on my deck that I added the 6-inch finished stripped piece border. And so if you multiply that times 2, that's 12. So 6 times 2 is 12. So now my quilt top is 84.5 inches. All right. Now people have been asking me to do a video for mitered borders. So I'm going to take the opportunity to do this. There is an easier way of doing this if you just want to make half square triangles. I have a video for that. I'll try to remember to link it at the eye above. But I wanted to do a true mitered border for you guys, the people that have been asking me to do a mitered border video. So I'm going to just take this 84.5 and bring it up to the top. We know that my string border is going to finish at 6 inches. So if I go ahead and add 12 to this number, that's going to give me my 96.5, because each side of my quilt, top and bottom, will have 6 inches for a total of 12 inches. So that means my quilt top will equal this 96.5. And the reason why I'm adding this right now is because when I add my miter borders, instead of cutting a string strip that's 84.5 that will go on my left and right sides of my quilt top, I need to add the full width of this quilt because the pieces are going to miter. And then as a bonus, you always want to add 2 to 4 inches of extra fabric. So since this is strings, I haven't wasted anything at this point, I'm going to go ahead and just add 4 inches. And if I add 4 inches to that, I'm now at 100.5. Now I can just X out this 0.5 because 100 is giving me 3.5 extra inches that I can use when I'm mitering my corners, which I will not be using. I will be trimming this off, but you never want to cut the exact size in case you need to do some kind of tweaking. So I am going to cut 4 strips that are 100 inches long, and I only have 1 strip set here because I wanted to show you how I got to this point. I've been showing you where I've been piecing all of these sections together. So when I trim these into 6-inch width sections, and then I went back and sewed those pieces together, this is just 1/2 of all of the pieces that I sewed together. Just one long piece here. And I don't even know how long this is. My thing now is I want to measure this and see if I got at least 200 inches. If not, I know that my other end is not going to be long enough. And I'm going to measure this, see how many inches I have, and I'll be right back. My 100-inch length. So I wanted to make sure before I cut anything that this length was long enough to get at least 2 sides of my quilt. So now I know that my other pieces will do that as well. Another reason, and I think I mentioned this before, when I cut these pieces in half in smaller chunks, I can re-sew them back together randomly so that these strips are not going to match perfectly when they're on the opposite sides of my quilt top either. So now I'm going to go ahead, take my other set of strips here. These strips that I have here, I'm going to randomly, well, the first step is I need to square up each end like I did for the ones that I've already done. So I'm going to just repeat the process, sew these randomly into a strip set, and then I'm going to come back with my 4 100-inch cuts for my borders. I'm back and I have my 4 strips. I have cut them to approximately 100 inches long. They don't have to be exact on this. And what I also have done is I have marked a left border and a right border, a top border and a bottom border. The reason why I did that is because when you have string strip borders or piece borders of any kind, it's a great idea to stay stitch in the seam allowance where your binding will end up. So I have stay stitched this all the way down on all 4 sides. It just helps to hold my seams in place. I don't have to worry about when I put this on the long arm that it's going to come apart. So I have stitched on my left one, I stitched on the left outer edge. On my right, I have stitched on the right outer edge. So the only way I could put this on the left would be if I flipped it upside down. So I do like to go ahead and mark them just so I know what I'm doing with them. And then here is my bottom border marked, and I stay stitched along the bottom outer edge. And then here is my top border, and I have stitched along the top edge of my top strip, so along the top. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to put our borders on. Now in traditional piecework, you can put your side borders on and then you put your top and bottoms, or if you're one of those liberal people, you put your top and bottom borders on first and then your sides. On a mitered corner, it doesn't matter the order of putting the borders on. Matter of fact, if you put them on both sides, I just feel like you're dealing with more fabric. Hence why I pieced my stay stitching seam prior to putting it on the quilt top. I don't have to have my whole entire quilt top here when I'm piecing this on, when I'm stitching this after the entire quilt top is done. So what I like to do is I like to take one of my sides, in this case it happens to be the left, and then I'm going to get one of my top or bottom borders, and in this case I have the top. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm going to sew on a left border and then I'm going to sew my top border. So for right now I'm going to put my top piece up there, and first thing I want to do is I want to find the center of this strip set. It just helps so that I know I'm not stretching my fabrics when I'm adding them to the quilt top. So at least I know I have a center marking that I can use. So I'm not stretching, just making sure fabric is nice and flat. And then when I get down to the end down here, I am just going to finger press in a seam along middle of my quilt right there. And I should be using a wood press, I just don't have it here at the area. And now I've got this fold, and this fold is going to go to match up to the center of my quilt. And I have put a pin at my fold mark so I know where my center of my quilt is, right there. And then, well, the center of my border strip, not my quilt. And then I'm going to get my quilt top, and I'm going to make sure that I have the left side of my quilt top. And I left my block numbers on here so that I would know what was the top and bottom. I haven't taken those off yet. So I just need to find block number 1. And this right here is block number 1. So this is the left side of my quilt top here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center of this quilt top. which I have already marked when I pressed my border. I didn't press out here when I pressed my border strip over. I left the center fold mark there so that I could use that. So I'm just going to match up the center mark here with that, right sides together, and then we're going to pin this together. Now when I do borders, I do like to pin my border so that I know that I'm not growing my quilt top. As a long armor, I do know that quilt tops do grow a lot in the border, especially if you're not pinning, and a mitered border is very easy for it to be stretched. So because I need to work the other way, I'm actually just going to flip this around. Now one thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the part that I'm pinning is flat, so that way I'm not stretching, I'm not pulling anything. The camera is kind of in my way, so I can't do a long flat area, but this is how I put my, I've got pin cushion here, but I'm just going to take some pins out so I don't have to reach that. And so you can now see how I can lay this flat and just put pins wherever I want to put pins. No stretching. Everything is laid out nice and flat. And then once I've reached the area that I can't reach anymore, then I just pull this part down, make sure my bottom layer is nice and flat, no pulling. And then I just lay my border piece out. Okay. So I am going to keep pinning as I'm leaving everything nice and flat. No tugging, no pulling. Just nice and flat. Alright, so I have pinned my left border onto this quilt top. And now what I want to do, and you could do this prior as well, is I like to use a tape measure and make sure that I am not stretching or pulling anything. And so from my center pin mark, which you can't see on the screen, I'm trying to make sure you can at least see right here, I am now going to measure from my pin mark that marks my center down to the corner where I want to stop stitching. I want that measurement to be 42, and the reason why I want that to be 42 is because my quilt is 84.5 inches, and if I divide that by 2, that is 42 1/4, but I'm stopping the stitch 1/4 inch away. So I want this pin to be at approximately or exactly as close as possible to 42 inches, and that lets me know that I'm in the right position. Trying to lay this out flat here. Okay, so I'm about 1/8 of an inch away from 42, and if I flip this back, my seam allowance is just a little bit fat, so I am going to adjust that just a little. Put my pin in right here. And then measure that again. Now, if you want, you can measure, you can use this tape measure. Let me show you on the top border. Whoops. What did I do with my top border? Is this my top? Yes. So this is my top border. And what I could do is fold, first you got to find the center. It might be a little easier this way because I'm just used to doing this. And so I'm like, let me go back and teach it for a beginner. So I'm marking my center mark here. So put a pin in that so I know where the center is. And then I could even leave this strip folded. I'm just marking my center, but I could leave this strip folded. I'm going to turn it this way so I can mark on the end where you can see. So I've got my strip folded, making sure my ends, my pieces are together here. All right, and now what I want to do is take my tape measure and measure down my 42 inches. So I got my, I'm going to have to make some adjustments here, guys. 42 inches, I got my edge. I'm measuring here. Come move this down so I can get it into the frame. Right there. And you can see here where I'm at 42 inches. And what I'll do is just stick a pin in that. And that lets me know that my 1/4 inch needs to be right here. Right there. Okay. So I've got both of them right now pinned. I'm just going to take one pin out because I've got little pinholes. I can tell where they go now. And then I put a pin down here. Back at the pinhole. Lay them back to see if they're on each other, and they are. So that's another way that you can mark where your border should start and stop on your quilt piece. So I'm going to go with the measurements that I have here. I've already measured this other end down here to make sure it's at 42. And I'm going to sew this border on. When I sew this border on, I'll be right back. All right. So here I have sewn my left border onto my quilt top. I have backstitched at the beginning and the end, starting and stopping 1/4 inch away from the edge of my quilt top. So I'm a little bit bigger than a 1/4 and I think I mentioned that before. I still happen to get in the same start and stop pot. I still happen to get in the same and start and stop point. But I do kind of like having it a little bit bigger, even though I have a slight hole, but I've never had a problem with that. So I'm going to carry on with my, it's kind of like 3/8 inch seam where I've started and stopped away from that edge. And now what I want to do, I'm just going to finger press for right now this open because I'm not sure what I want to do with my seam allowances yet. So, and the bottom part of it is really not important. It's actually going to be more important at the top here. So I just want to use my little wood press, which I have in my sewing room, and the one I had in here I left at Kevin's house. So I don't have it with me. Okay. One thing I did is I have a fabric that's going to overlap here in my miter. I did not pay attention to that. And so we're just going to go ahead and go with it. So right here I have my pin. That pin is where I want to put at my 1/4 inch seam going back this way. So I'm going to fold that down. I need to have this pin so that it's 1/4 inch away from the edge of this quilt top. And then I'm just going to take that pin out and stick it right back in the same position. That pin is going to be my new start and stop point. Underneath here, I have pulled this fabric out so that I don't get it caught as I'm stitching across the other way. So I'm going to start stitching here. These things are not going to be attached. Now I'm going to go and pin my center pin where I've got my border. One of them has a pin, the other one has a fold that I creased in. So I'm now going to match that up. Take that out and temporarily put it back in. And then the last thing I'm going to do is pin the other corner at the pin 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. So the edge of the quilt will be right here, the pin is right here. So here's the end of my quilt top. And I'm going to be down a little bit so I can get it at my 1/4 inch mark. You can see right there. And then once I'm at that 1/4 inch mark, I'm just going to slide my pieces together. Hold that in place, take that pin out and put it right back. I can see the hole into position. And so you can see that on the back of the quilt here. I'm gonna slide that over just a little and I can see the hole to put it back in. And so now I have my 1/4 inch seam right here. So now I just pin in the middle between the center pins, and then I'm going to sew that seam and I will be right back. Alright, so I now have my border sewn to my left and my top, and I moved my labels down so that they wouldn't interfere with the actual mitering of the corners. Now, the reason why I didn't press is because when I miter this corner, I actually want to press my seams out this way toward the string border. But when I'm mitering my corners, all I do is I pick this quilt up, put these pieces together, I pull this quilt from corner to corner, and what I want to do is get the seams that are aligned right here, and I'm actually pushing those seams back. So I'm meeting up the corner where these two pieces meet, and you can see the little V sort of forming in here, and it's kind of dark right here. So I do have lights on, but that's the best I can do for you guys. So I have my quilt right here where the seams, I have my quilt right here where the seams meet up. I'm aligning my edges, and I'm also pressing these seams back because I want to see where I started and stopped my stitching. So I am going to put some of this, so I'm going to put this down here flat on my work surface here. And I've still got this piece that's coming out of here. And now I want to get a ruler and a pen. Okay, so now I want to be able to see where I stopped and started that stitching with the back stitching. I want to make sure that these two pieces are laying straight on top of each other, that they are not angled out, they're not crooked, they're not laying out like that. We want them nice and flat, edges to edges. Your rulers have 45-degree markings on them, and I want to put this 45-degree marking on the edge of my quilt top, and I want to angle out this way. I want to angle from this inner point and come out 45 degrees. So what I do is I put my 45-degree mark on the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to have to scoot this up a little bit because my ruler is long. And so I've got my 45-degree line on the edge of my fabric. Now I'm just a little bit past where I started and stopped stitching. I want to slide this ruler down my 45-degree until I get to that area where I back stitched. So I'm going to come in here so I can see what's going on there. So from here to there is a nice 45 degree. All of this area should be nice and flat. I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to mark that line so that you can see it. You can use another marking utensil. I'm going to be sewing on this line right there. So I'm hoping you can see that. And then to keep everything in position, I'm going to take a few pins to hold this down so that it doesn't move while I'm stitching. Make sure I'm through both layers, and then as I'm stitching, coming across these pins, I will remove these pins. And then I'm just going to go put a pin back here. I won't be starting back there, but I'm just keeping all of this stuff from flopping around. I'm just putting holding pins here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start stitching where I stopped at that 1/4 inch. I'm going to back stitch, come all the way to the end, and I'm going to also back stitch at this end. So I'll go stitch that seam. I'll come back and show it to you. I'm back, and I have just removed the 3 pins only that was in my stitching line. And so now I can remove my holding pins. These pins are just holding material out of the way so that it doesn't get caught in my stitching line and I don't have to worry about things flopping around while I'm trying to stitch. I'm also going to need my rotary cutter, which I have buried with the quilt top. So right now we have this stitch line, and I'm going to have to turn this because I'm left-handed. So if you want to, okay. So the first thing you might want to do is check your seam before you cut, because now we're ready to trim. And all you have to do is just lay your piece back, and you can see here that I have mitered this corner here, and it's laying perfectly flat without even me going to an iron to press. My corner here, when I press this seam open, I've got just a little bit of one stitch that went over in here, and I'm not concerned about that. That's a pretty good corner for me, or to me. Right here, it looks like I took one stitch into the corner here. That's why I kind of like to leave a little bit bigger seam allowance. Use 3/8 instead of 1/4. I have a little bit more room, but I feel like I can press that out as well. But if I'm looking here, I can see where this corner is nice and mitered. So then the next step is just to trim 1/4 of an inch away. Some people like to trim it a little bigger, but I figured 1/4 inch seams worked throughout the entire quilt top. Why change it now? So I'm gonna just go ahead and stitch this, cut this 1/4 of an inch away. And I'm just using that stitch line, putting that stitch line on my 1/4 inch line, and I'm going to trim. This here is excess pieces. You could sew 2 of these together and end up with a 1/2 square triangle as well. So we'll deal with those later. And then I just take this, go to my iron, I can press this seam up that I've already connected, and then I can press this seam here open, and things will lay nice and flat down in these intersections. Last thing you're going to need to do once you press this open is trim your dog ears. Okay, so I am not going to do any pressing until the end. Matter of fact, I trim my dog ears when they're folded, and I just take sit this at a 45 degree. Wherever I stop stitching, I just go straight up, and then that tends to take care of my dog ears for me. And you can see when I press this seam open now, I don't have any dog ears hanging there. Okay, so I'm going to do this all the way around this quilt top And when I get to the bottom, because when I put the bottom border on, I'll have the bottom left corner and the bottom right corner to do. So this quilt top here is actually done. I just need to get this stitched so I can get a photo for you guys. And this is also a mitered corner here. This is the one where I mistakenly put the fabric in the wrong place. I wasn't paying attention. And then I'm just gonna walk out here to the outside of my deck so you can see the finished quilt top. This is the best I can do with what I'm working with. It is super, super windy. This is my completed top with the purple. Again, got my mitered border. Down here, every corner came out great. And this is how my border piece looked. For some reason, when I just looked at this quilt, I just saw a lot of purple in it. So I decided to use purple as a spacer just to give it a place to rest. And got my backing made, so now we're ready to put this on the long arm. Thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Share my channel with your other quilting friends, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye, Teaquilters. Stay blessed.